Before we go deeper, notice what makes "your salary is not your wealth" here is what actually is so misleading at first glance. Most people see the surface story and stop there. The value of this chapter is that it changes the lens, because once the frame is cleaner, the rest of the topic becomes much easier to understand honestly. A strong salary changes life quickly. Better home, better choices, better flexibility, less day-to-day pressure. Because the improvement is real, people start assuming income itself is the wealth. But salary is mainly a flow. It solves today beautifully. The question is, what remains of that strength once the flow slows or disappears? Regular paychecks create a powerful emotional illusion. They keep arriving, so the system feels stable. Bills are manageable. Problems are solvable. Lifestyle feels supported. But repeated inflow can hide structural weakness for years, because it postpones the moment when you have to find out what the balance sheet can do on its own. This is the first distinction that needs to be sharper. Income is what comes in. Net worth is what you own after subtracting what you owe. Wealth goes even deeper than net worth, because it includes the quality of what you own, the liquidity you have, the cash flow those assets create, and how much freedom they actually buy you. High earners are especially exposed to this confusion because they can carry more weak structure for longer. A thin reserve does not feel urgent if the next paycheck is large. Overpriced lifestyle choices feel manageable if cash keeps coming. That is why good income can delay reality. It cushions mistakes that would have forced learning much earlier at lower earnings. Another reason salary gets confused with wealth is that income can imitate the appearance of being wealthy. The car, neighborhood, travel, schools, and routines can all look strong. But if most of that lifestyle would become hard to carry within months of income stopping, what you are looking at is not deep wealth. It is high-grade consumption supported by active labor. This confusion costs people years because it changes what they optimize. They chase higher income without asking whether the extra income is being converted into stronger structure. The career improves, the spending improves, but the balance sheet may improve far less than the salary suggests, and that gap becomes painfully obvious later. That opening distinction may sound subtle, but it is doing most of the heavy lifting. Once the frame changes, the rest of the story stops feeling random. You begin to see that what looked ordinary on the surface was already shaping the financial result underneath. Now we move from headline to mechanism. This is where the topic stops feeling like a slogan and starts behaving like a real system. The later outcomes stop looking mysterious and start looking like the natural result of specific incentives and habits. A useful way to define wealth is stored freedom. Wealth is the part of your financial life that gives you choices, even when current income is under pressure. It is money and assets that buy time, lower fear, and reduce dependence. When framed that way, the difference between salary and wealth becomes much easier to see. First, wealth includes reserves. Not because cash is the highest return asset, but because cash buys breathing room. It lets you absorb shocks, wait for better decisions, and keep temporary problems from becoming structural damage. A person with strong reserves often has more real financial power than someone with a bigger salary and no margin. Second, wealth includes productive assets. Assets that can grow in value, throw off income, or reduce future dependence on labor. Investments, business ownership, property, intellectual property, and other forms of durable, productive capital all belong in this category. This is where income begins turning into something that can keep working after you stop. Third, wealth includes the shape of your obligations. Two people can earn the same income and have very different levels of real wealth if one has a far heavier fixed cost base. High fixed costs quietly shrink freedom. Lower fixed costs expand it. That is why wealth is partly about assets and partly about how much of life those assets must constantly support. Fourth, wealth includes runway. How long can you operate without immediate panic if income pauses? Runway matters because time changes the quality of every decision. With runway, you can negotiate, recover, and think. Without it, even good opportunities become hard to act on, because urgency is making the calls for you. And finally, wealth includes cash flow that is not fully tied to your next hour of labor. This does not need to be massive on day one. Even modest ownership income changes the psychology of money because it proves the system is beginning to work without total dependence on your active output. Once the mechanism is visible, a lot of confusing money behavior suddenly makes sense. It stops looking like chaos and starts looking like the predictable result of time horizon, incentives, and the way people position capital under pressure. This is the point where the cost becomes real. Up to now, the idea can still sound abstract, but Chapter 3 forces the issue into ordinary life. That matters, because financial damage is usually underestimated until it gets translated into trade-offs, pressure, and lost future options. The most common reason high earners stay fragile is that lifestyle scales faster than structure. More income arrives, and most of the increase gets absorbed by housing, convenience, travel, schooling, subscriptions, and better versions of everyday life. None of that feels irresponsible in isolation. The problem is cumulative. The system gets more expensive without becoming proportionally stronger. Raises often function like permission slips: permission to upgrade, permission to loosen discipline, permission to stop worrying. But a raise is more useful when treated as capital reallocation power. If every increase goes straight into consumption, income improves while dependence barely changes. That is how high earners can look successful and still feel trapped. Another trap is busyness. High earners are often professionally overloaded, which makes salary feel even more valuable. It is funding a difficult life, so it starts to feel synonymous with security. But busyness can hide the fact that almost no durable system is being built beneath the work. The machine is loud, but the ownership layer remains too thin. A strong salary can also hide concentration risk. One employer, one industry, one skill stack, one region. When income is high, concentration often feels efficient. But wealth thinking asks a different question. What happens if the central source weakens? If the answer is immediate financial stress, then income has not yet become wealth in the full sense. Many high earners tell themselves they will build assets later, once life is less demanding or once the next milestone is reached. The problem is that later usually comes with a more expensive lifestyle and more obligations, not fewer. Delaying ownership is one of the fastest ways to stay rich in appearance and average in long-term resilience. And underneath all of this sits the wrong scoreboard. They track salary, bonus, and maybe account balance. They do not track months of runway, ratio of owned cash flow to living costs, asset growth rate, or the share of income captured before lifestyle. The scoreboard says success, while the deeper system stays underdeveloped. This is why the damage is usually larger than the headline suggests, and is rarely just a number problem. It becomes a freedom problem, a margin problem, and eventually a future options problem. That is what makes the cost so easy to ignore early and so frustrating later. At this stage, the useful move is reframe rather than blame. The goal is not to admire the problem or panic about it. The goal is to replace a weak money model with one that produces better choices consistently once real life gets involved. A better question is, how much of your life is already owned, not funded for this month? Owned. How many months of basic life can current assets cover? How much income arrives from ownership rather than labor? How resilient is your system if your work rhythm changes? Those are wealth questions, and they produce far cleaner behavior. Another strong metric is investable surplus. After living, protecting, and necessary obligations, how much can still be routed into future building assets? Gross income is emotionally impressive. Investable surplus is strategically useful. It tells you whether your salary is actually being converted into something that can compound. Track fixed cost pressure too. How much of your current life must be financed every month before you even begin moving toward goals? High fixed costs quietly shrink your freedom even when income looks strong. Lower fixed costs do not always feel glamorous, but they often create more real wealth per dollar earned than visible upgrades do. It also helps to separate asset income from earned income and watch that number closely. Even modest ownership cash flow changes your orientation because it shows the system is beginning to work beyond your direct labor. Once that number exists, even at a small scale, it becomes much easier to understand what real wealth is supposed to feel like. And track time. Time without panic is one of the purest expressions of wealth. If a person has money but no time to think, recover, pivot, or say no, then the structure is still weaker than it looks. Wealth is not just about higher numbers. It is about more controlled time. Once the scoreboard changes, behavior usually follows. Raises get routed differently, lifestyle decisions get judged differently, asset ownership becomes more urgent, salary becomes respected but not confused with the final goal. That shift alone can transform how someone uses their next 5 or 10 high-income years. Once the model gets cleaner, the behavior can get cleaner too. Most financial progress accelerates only after people stop asking the wrong question and start organizing money around the right one. Better framing usually arrives before better outcomes. Now the idea needs to become operational. Insight only matters if it changes what the next dollars do, what the next rule becomes, or how the system behaves the next time life gets noisy. That is where strong financial content separates itself from interesting commentary. The first move is mechanical. Capture more money before lifestyle gets access to it. Automatic transfers, asset contributions, reserve funding, debt strategy. Wealth does not usually grow because people become saintly. It grows because capital gets routed earlier and more deliberately than the rest of life expects. Then separate safety capital from growth capital. Keep the reserves that let you breathe. But once those are honestly funded, do not leave long-term money parked in a short-term role forever. Safety is part of wealth, but overusing safety for capital that should be building can quietly stall the whole system. Next, build ownership on purpose. That may be diversified market exposure, business equity, real assets, or other forms of durable, productive capital. The exact asset mix matters, but the principle matters more. Salary should be translated into systems that continue working when the paycheck pauses. The next time income rises, ask a better question. How much of this increase can I use to buy freedom, instead of just nicer maintenance? That could mean faster investing, stronger reserves, lower debt, or more optionality. Wealth grows fastest when raises improve the system before they improve the image. If you already have a high-income lifestyle, the move is not panic. It is correction. Let the structure catch up. Slow expansion. Increase capture. Improve the balance sheet. Lower hidden fragility. There's no shame in realizing your salary outran your wealth. The real mistake is refusing to fix the mismatch once you see it clearly. So your salary is not your wealth. It is your fuel. Wealth is what that fuel has built and what can keep carrying your life when the flow changes. Once you see that difference, you stop chasing income alone and start building something much harder to fake. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe. We publish 3 videos every week. That is the whole WealthLogic point. Money gets easier to respect once it is organized on purpose. The people who win long-term usually are not responding better to one moment. They are running a better system every month, even when nothing dramatic seems to be happening.